Hi everyone, I hope you're having a peaceful day. Today we'll explore a story filled with quiet courage and unseen danger. When Officer Lee goes undercover to face a deadly gang boss, while Sam waits miles away, her heart tied to prayers and hope beneath the evening sky. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next episode of Sam and Lee. Dawn filtered through the leaves like quiet breath, brushing against the small wooden house clinging to the red earth hillside. Little Sam stood in front of the damp clay wall, her hair tied high, hands streaked with soil. The small hoe moved in a calm rhythm, each strike carving a round hollow, a soft cradle for the hens about to lay. The falling earth made a gentle patter, mixing with faraway rooster crows. Morning felt whole, peaceful, alive. When the last nest was done, Sam wiped her forehead and smiled. "Eggs soon," she whispered, half to herself. She turned toward the palm-thatched kitchen, brushing aside dry leaves and small twigs. Her eyes stopped at the basket of taro she'd peeled yesterday, purple skins curling around ivory flesh. "Let's fry it with sugar," she murmured. She lit the small oil lamp on the shelf. Its yellow glow flickered against the knife blade as she sliced each piece into even shapes. The sound of the knife tapping the board made a steady, comforting rhythm. Soon, the taro floated in a basin of cold water, rinsed of dust, ready for the pan. She knelt to the firewood stove. White smoke curled up as she struck the match. The smell of burning wood filled the air, sharp, sweet, familiar. Oil sizzled in the pan, tiny fireworks crackling when the taro dropped in. The scent of caramelized sugar and fried roots spread through the open yard, mingling with the damp, earthy air from her garden. Sam stood still, eyes bright, waiting for each piece to turn golden. Far away, a billiard hall sat empty except for the echo of clacking balls. The air was thick, unmoving. Lee sat in a dark corner, wearing a faded grey shirt, his eyes sharp but tired. His iced coffee had melted long ago. He swirled it absently, watching the brown liquid spin. Every tick from the wall clock pressed heavier on his chest. Waiting always did that, filled the silence with things he couldn't say, things he wished he could go back and undo. The door slammed open. A man limped in, Mr. Vuong, his wooden crutch knocking against the floor. His left leg was wrapped in a blood-stained bandage, but he carried himself like pain was an old friend. Behind him followed Mr. Fong, younger, broad-shouldered, black dragon tattoo curling up his neck like smoke. "You're late," Lee said quietly. His voice was steady, but anger flickered beneath. "Had a small fight with another group. Just a scratch," Vuong replied, smirking faintly. Fong pulled out a wooden chair. Its legs screeched across the floor, making the air jump. "Boss is waiting," he said, nodding toward the door. Lee's eyes swept the room. No cameras, no strange shadows, but the pressure of infiltration sat heavy on him. Every moment here was borrowed time. Vuong slid an old phone across the table. "Fong takes you to the boss. I'm sitting this one out." Lee stood. His shadow stretched long across the cracked tiles, the quiet weight of the man stepping from safety into fire. Miles away, under the same sun, Sam pushed open the garden gate. The tomato leaves glistened from morning dew, but when she looked closer, her heart sank. Tiny pests crawled along the stems. "Need rice husks now," she muttered, frowning. The wind brushed her cheek, carrying the scent of damp soil. Somewhere behind her, the hens clucked softly, unaware of her worry. She bent down, brushing the leaves with her fingers, each fragile, each alive. In another world entirely, Lee was preparing to face the gang boss. The contrast was cruel, the peace of the countryside and the heat of danger. Yet in both, there was the same quiet persistence. Sam's garden fighting pests, Lee fighting fear. By noon, Sam was pushing her old handcart down the red dirt road. 2 empty sacks rattled behind her. The sun was harsh, glaring white against the dry hills. At the rice mill, the seller, a middle-aged man with a torn brown shirt and a grin missing half its teeth, pointed toward a heap of dry husks. 10,000 a bag, he said. Sam bent low and began to scoop, each shovelful whispering into the bag. The scent of old rice husks mixed with the hot wind, reminding her of her childhood. Days spent under the same sun, carrying baskets heavier than her arms could handle. She paid with 2 crumpled notes, thanked the man, and began the long walk home. When she reached the yard, she lit a small fire and fed the husks into it. The flames burned red and steady, smoke rising white into the blue sky. She sat on the dirt, fanning the fire with a palm leaf fan. Ash drifted upward like bits of dream. "Soil will loosen, veggies stronger," she whispered, her voice a prayer. The hens circled her feet, flapping their wings, hungry for scraps. Sam stood, swung the machete, and cut down a tall banana tree. The green leaves fell like rain. She chopped the trunk into small chunks and dropped them into a trough. The hens rushed in, pecking and clucking with glee. Sam's laughter slipped out, bright, unguarded. Amid smoke and sunlight, she looked almost glowing. Burning the husks felt like cleansing her worries. The soil would renew, and maybe her heart would too. Somewhere far away, Lee faced something she couldn't see, something that kept her chest tight in quiet moments. But here, for now, the day was golden. Meanwhile, the sun scorched a vast villa courtyard where Lee arrived with Mr. Fong. The iron gate creaked as it opened, and the boss sat under a large umbrella in the middle of the yard. A black pistol lay on the wooden table, glinting under the heat. Lee's steps slowed. Each one echoed against the gravel, sharp, deliberate. "Name, hometown, previous job?" the boss asked, voice rough, eyes like knives. "Lamb," he said. "Got out of prison a few months ago, drug trade 3 years." His tone was calm, his pulse anything but. The boss leaned forward, cigar smoke curling from his mouth. Then he raised the pistol, pressing the cold barrel against Lee's forehead. The heat around them made the metal burn. Lee didn't blink. "I've faced real police guns," he said, steady. "This doesn't scare me." Fong stepped in quickly. He worked transport for old Mr. Hung across Laos routes, knows the market well. The boss's gaze stayed hard. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. "We'll see. Small job first. Prove yourself." Lee nodded once, the muscles in his neck tight. Sweat slid down his temple. Fong clapped his shoulder. "You're in, for now." The boss waved them off. Lee turned and walked toward the gate. The gravel crunched beneath his feet. The sun threw his shadow long across the red bricks. Each step away felt heavier. The air outside smelled of cut grass and smoke, but the fear stayed, thick, invisible, alive. He thought of Sam, barefoot in the yard, maybe tending her hens right now. And something in him clenched, a mix of hope and regret that wouldn't go away. The courtyard's heat pressed down like a hand. Lee crossed the last stretch of gravel and felt the sun bite the back of his neck. Behind him, the boss's voice drifted from under the umbrella, low, almost lazy, the kind of tone that could turn sharp without warning. Trustworthy enough? There was a beat of silence, then Fong's reply, firm, eager. He's worth the profit. We'll monitor. Give him a trial shipment. Li's jaw tightened. Sweat gathered at his hairline, rolled past his ear. He didn't look back. The pistol had left a cold memory on his skin that the sun couldn't burn off. Every step out of that yard felt like stepping deeper into it, like the gate only changed the scenery, not the danger. The iron hinges groaned when Fong pushed the gate. "Done!" Fong said brightly, the grin too wide for the heat. "Celebrate!" Celebrate? The word sat wrong in Li's mouth. He said nothing and swung a leg over the motorcycle. The engine coughed, then roared, slicing the heavy air. Fong gunned the throttle and the bike leapt forward, spitting them out from the cool shadow of the gate into noon's merciless white. Wind slapped Li's face. It should have felt clean, freeing. Instead, it tasted like dust and metal and a promise he hadn't made but had to keep. He pushed the fear down where it always went, under the ribs, behind the steady voice, beneath the mask made for rooms like that courtyard. His hands found their hold, and he let the road pull his eyes forward. Somewhere far away, farther than the kilometers between here and the hills, the small wooden house breathed in its own time. Sam was still by the fire in the dirt yard. The husks burned red, steady as a heartbeat. She fanned the flame gently, and white smoke rose in loose ribbons, writing quiet messages into the sky. She didn't read them as omens. She didn't believe in omens. She believed in soil that could be loosened, in seeds that could take, in the patience of things that grow while you're not looking. She stood and stretched, the ache in her lower back a reminder that she had carried 2 heavy sacks today and would carry 2 more if the garden asked. Ash settled on her sleeves. She brushed it off with the same small smile she used when hens pecked at her toes. Nearby, the machete leaned against the chopped banana trunk, the day's proof that one good swing, repeated enough, could provide. "Stronger roots," she said, not loudly, not to anyone, just to name the hope, so it wouldn't feel like a secret. She pictured the ash crumbling into the red soil, opening it, letting breath move through. She pictured the leaves tomorrow, less droop, more lift. Then her chest tightened for a reason she couldn't point to. She looked up, toward the ridge, toward the place where the town and its shadows began. The motorcycle ate the road. Fong's laugh kept blowing back in ragged pieces, breaking on the wind. Li's eyes ticked from mirror to horizon to side streets, reflexes held tight, measuring every corner. A truck rattled past in the opposite lane, a blast of hot diesel that made him think, absurdly, of the billiard hall's stale coffee. The villa shrank behind them, the city swelled ahead, more eyes, more noise, more places to vanish. "Not bad," Fong called without turning. "Boss likes a steady face." Li said nothing. A steady face was easy. It was the steady heart that cost him. The bike slowed near a junction. A dog exploded from a doorway, then thought better of it and shrank back. Fong's phone buzzed. He let it ring and then slid it back into his pocket. "Later," he muttered. The road curved. The glare softened a little. Buildings rose closer together. Li felt the day change temperature, not cooler, just different. like stepping from open heat into a crowd's heat. The kind that presses from all sides. Back on the hillside, Sam had finished feeding the hens. The trough was full of chopped banana, the yard scattered with bright green leaves that were brown by morning. The hens clucked like they were telling a joke only hens found funny. She rinsed her hands at the jar by the steps, the water shockingly cool against smoke-warmed skin. Her reflection broke and came back together in the ripple. 2 tired eyes, a strand of hair fallen from the high tie, a face that had learned to smile without waiting for a reason. She lifted the sack and shook ash across her path between the tomato rows. It settled into the furrows in fine grey sheets. She spread it with her foot, slow, careful. The wind tried to meddle, she let it. The world would keep doing what it does, moving what you place, changing what you plan. She had learned to work with it instead of against it. By the time she finished, the sun had begun to tilt. The sharp light turned soft as if some invisible hand had rotating the skies dimmer. The yard's edges blurred, the garden's colors warmed. What had been work turned into something like a long exhale. Lee's exhale came later. Fong cut the engine outside a low building with no sign. Inside later, Fong said. For now, eat. Another grin, thinner this time, like a wire pulled tight. He jerked his chin toward a food stall across the street. Lee nodded, small, almost a flinch rather than a gesture, and followed. The air at the stall smelled of broth and heat, and the kind of metal spoons that have outlived 100 hands. He ate what was put in front of him and tasted none of it. His mind wandered back to the pistol, the umbrella, the sound of gravel. Then farther, beyond streets and yard walls, to a dirt fire ring and a girl fanning embers with a palm leaf fan. He placed the chopsticks down. When? He asked. Soon, Fong said. Trial run. You'll be told. He leaned back, eyes narrowed like he was looking at the shape of Lee's shadow on the ground. Keep that steady face. Lee held it. Always. The answer fit the day like a key fits a lock. It sounded right. It felt wrong. But wrong had its own rhythm now. Dusk unrolled over Sam's garden like a soft cloth. The sky threw one last orange wash across the tomato stakes, turning the strings to glowing lines. Sam stood between the rows, fingertips brushing the new ash, then the leaves. The pests were still there, of course they were, but she imagined them fewer tomorrow. She let that be enough for now. 2 sacks of husks had become light white ash. She spread it evenly, careful to leave space around the stems. The soil looked different, looser, more forgiving. A small victory. She tucked it into her day like a lucky coin. The hens had quieted to murmurs, heads tucked, feet shuffling in slow circles. She sat on the old wooden step and watched the light go. A small wind came, smelling faintly of burned husk and damp leaves. Somewhere down the slope, a dog barked once and then reconsidered. The world arranged itself into evening. She thought of Lee, and her hands went still in her lap. She didn't know where he was, or what kind of room he stood in now, or what kind of eyes were measuring him. She didn't know if his voice had to be hard today, or if his silence had to be harder. She knew only the shape of the space he left, in the door frame, at the edge of the bedroll, in the way the yard felt when something was missing, and you couldn't name it without making it feel larger. She closed her eyes. "Come back," she said softly. No drama in it. Just a simple line drawn across distance. The moon rose, silver and patient, easing itself over the ridge. It laid its light across the garden, turning ash to frost, turning the leaves to thin glass. Sam opened her eyes and watched the silver settle across everything she'd touched today: soil, ash, leaves, trough, machete handle, the corner of the step her heel pressed into. The light made a kind of promise without words. In that promise, she found her afterthought. Tomorrow she would wake early. She would check for pests again. She would carry the water can. She would look to the ridge and not let the fear decide the day's pace. Work would be the prayer she returned to when words weren't enough. Somewhere across town, Lee leaned against a wall in the building with no sign, the motorcycle's heat cooling beside him. He could feel the day on his skin. He listened to Fong's footsteps retreat and the murmur of a conversation he wasn't invited into. The trial run would come, of course it would, and he would step into it with the same face he had used all day. Under it the storm would stay contained because it had to. He let one breath go slow. Another. He pictured the dirt yard under moonlight. He pictured ash that looked like frost. He pictured a hand lifting a fan, a shoulder rolling back a knot of tiredness. He didn't let himself picture more. The garden's silver deepened, the hens settled. The night gathered without hurry. On the step, Sam rested her chin on her knees and watched the quiet take shape. It didn't erase worry, it just made a safe shelf for it to sit on until morning. She whispered one last time, not bargaining, not pleading, just laying down the thought like a small stone to mark the spot. Be safe. The moonlight held, the soil breathed. In two different places under the same pale sky, two people kept their promises to the day. One by waiting with care, the other by walking into danger without losing the part of himself that knew the way home. Sometimes love isn't about being together. It's about trusting from afar. Even in silence and distance, care can travel farther than words ever could. And somewhere between danger and waiting, hope quietly keeps them both alive.